Shez, we have been talking about the Christian Horner saga, debacle, whatever you want to call it, drama. I would like to call this whole Red Bull drama keeping up with the Kardashians, with the card being the operative word there. I hope you got my drift there.
Thanks.
But
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
but I mean, it stands to reason. I mean, for one, we stayed out of this conversation up until last week when we had sort of heard some what we thought was some finality to it, and then there was a whole bunch of leaks and all of that. And so I think it makes sense to for us to sort of follow up on that story, if you will. Because one of the things that impressed me was the team principals conference from this past weekend's race.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that seemed pretty clear to me was that Christian Horner was ready to move on from it, which anyone in his position would be ready to move on. But his tone, right, and the way he responded to question after question after question after, and it literally was, I think there was, there were questions only for him. There's no point in having those other team principals there, to be honest. Like they were just sort of sitting there awkward, looking at,
Well, I
but
bet Bruno Fama was pretty happy they weren't
you
firing
know,
questions at him.
I totally agree with you. He was like, wow, this is perfect. This is
Yeah, this
exactly
has
how
worked out really well for
pair me
me.
up with him all the time this year. Like just do that. But I'm with you there.
Yeah, yeah. Listen, I take your point, and yeah, I got that impression a little bit as well. That he's really tried over the past weekend and the last race to try and show like a solid show that he's a solid unit, especially with his wife. Jerry Horner's been down and sort of been by his side, however forced that might look. But yeah, I mean, I can imagine it must be really difficult. But the flip side to that is that he at least has a voice in this, and he's been able to put his side of the story
Sure.
out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in a way that the complainant in this hasn't really been able to do.
Yep.
But I've said this in another arena. But the further away we get from that initial event, the more that becomes irrelevant actually, and the more it becomes about the drawing of battle lines between different factions between Red Bull, and that was borne out by events that happened a bit later on in the weekend.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that even the fact that we brought it up last week, right? We stayed out of this for months where it was quite the hot topic, quite the clickbaity stuff that it has been for many people. The reality of this is that I think the initial story allegation has given way to everything else that has sort of come about, right? And it has been quite interesting to see how things have been communicated. It's what you say and what you don't say, really, that sort of show up in these things. And
Yeah.
it was quite interesting to me that I just read a few minutes before we got on here that Helmut Marko has sort of reaffirmed his desire to stay at Red Bull, which I didn't think needed to be said at any time before this, but that goes to show you now. I think as we get to move further away from this, the fact that Yoss spoke up, the fact that Max said that, I'm with Helmut Marko, and then now Helmut coming in and saying, no, I do intend to sort of see out the end of my contract, which is,
Yeah.
I believe, 2.5 years from now,
Yeah.
was
So,
quite
so
interesting.
Ammar,
What
we,
do you
we
make
should
of that?
probably talk about that. So
Yeah.
what has happened since we last dropped this? So after Verstappen Senior made his comments about Christian Horner being a problem within Red Bull, and that Red Bull was going to implode because of him. We've come to this weekend, and there's been Helmut Marko speaking to Austrian TV saying that, look, I might be in a bit of trouble, and I'm going to have a chat with the CEO Oliver Mintzlaff, and I might be suspended. And the conjecture around that was that actually it was Helmut Marko that was at least partly responsible for the release of the WhatsApp messages that Red Bull had not wanted to be released. And the response to that from Max Verstappen was essentially, to paraphrase, it's going to be a problem if Helmut goes. And in slightly not uncertain terms, he kind of said, if Helmut goes, I'm out too, which created a massive powder keg, didn't it? And we were then sort of on tenterhooks waiting for what the outcome of that meeting between Marko and Mintzlaff was going to be. And we found out this morning that Helmut Marko has had that meeting. It was very productive, and actually he's going to stay there. As far as Oliver Mintzlaff is concerned, he's going to stay in position, and they're not going to suspend him. But there's still a sword of Damocles hanging over this whole thing, because we know that Oliver Mintzlaff is now off to have a meeting with Shalom Yvidia, the majority shareholder of the Red Bull organization as a whole, and they're going to discuss whether this is appropriate or not. All of this is again interesting because, as we talked about in our last video, the Yvidia family own 51% of Red Bull. They have a controlling stake, and they were the ones that effectively rubber stamped the clearance of Christian Horner after they got the results of this investigation. So we have that side of this, that the Yvidia family, probably Milton Keynes, the organization, and Christian Horner are on one side of this, and on the other you have Jos Verstappen, and now Helmut Marko, and now by extension Oliver Mintzlaff. So the Austrian side of this, all kind of lining up on the other side against Christian Horner, and that seems to be where the battle lines are being drawn. So it will be interesting to see what happens after that meeting between Yvidia and Mintzlaff in Dubai as to whether or not that judgment about Helmut Marko remains or not. And I don't, again, I don't know which way that's going to go, but you kind of have to feel that that with the majority shareholder in your corner, Christian Horner is probably going to be the guy that comes out on top in all of this. But it's so messy, Ammar. Like having to try and wade through all of this is doing my head in, man.
No, I'm completely with you, and does this really work out though? Is it just as simple as saying, sorry, my bad, let's just shelve all of this and sort of move on, which I think Christian Horner is trying to. He certainly seems like the guy who is trying to have the bigger heart in this, and sort of take that real leadership stance, right? Of saying, okay, it's done. Let's draw a line, right? Was what he said, or is it just being said? It's a PR thing.
The problem with that is that the one way to have made all of this go away was to make the whole investigation transparent. You get rid of all of it,
but it wouldn't have been. It would have
at least got rid of.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, it would have either said, "Fine, you're right, the grievance can be dismissed," but there's been so much opacity about all of this that we don't know what the investigation said. And on top of that, Ammar, the next thing that's happened is that the complainant has now been suspended. On what grounds, we don't know.
With pay, by the way, which then goes to show you what's happening, right?
But whatever the reason is, she has been suspended, which, taking all of the misogyny out of this, right? And it's bad. It's because essentially because essentially what it shows me, and we talked about it in our friend Cameron's podcast the other day, that actually women that are looking to come and work in Formula One are going to look at this and they're going to say, well, I'm either going to be used as a pawn or I can't speak out. So let's just put that to one side. But the person that's been at the middle of this has been suspended. We don't know why. We don't know what the basis of the grievance being dismissed is. Now, I agree that Red Bull don't have an obligation to tell us any of that. They don't. They're a private organization. They can deal with this how they want to. But if you don't want further questions, if you don't want this to be questioned again and again and again in the media, just be a bit more open about it.
Yeah.
So answer some of the questions directly.
I think that the reason you're not seeing, which by the way, I completely agree with it. There should be transparency. I think we've gone back and forth with some of our viewers who have sort of said, well, this is a private matter. And the reality is that you can protect the identity of, I guess in this case, the person who's complaining, right? And still be able to give us what
Some
the process
information.
was, some
100%.
information, and also say, oh, by the way, we either stand by our guy or don't. Like saying the complaint is dismissed to me is sort of taking the most sort of politically correct, the I guess the stance that you would take
The most
to be
vague,
legal,
it's the
right?
most vague
It's
answer.
the bare
Doesn't
minimum
tell
that
you
you could do,
anything.
really, right? It's to don't
Doesn't tell
tell
you
you
anything.
anything, which then and then you start having subsequent leaks, and then I mean, there's theories about Helmut Marko being part of the. I mean, you just said it, right? Like maybe he was the one who leaked it, but why? And so I think you're right. The problem with them being transparent is this: the second they become transparent with it, it's not going to be the actual misogyny or whatever those text message strings are, if they're actually true. The subject no longer remains the subject, right? Again, it's everything around it, right? Because there are probably stakeholders attached to this in ways that exposes them. And then, oh, by the way, at that point, the team literally explodes. Like this no longer is a figure of speech, as Jos Verstappen is saying. The second they give you all the transparency, I think there are bombshells in there, or at least there are landmines that will result in other people leaving. And I think you can see who those people are by the public comments that have been out there, which all of which is for me, what I'm thinking about is how long does this arrangement last? Like this has got to be one of the fringest agreements if it has. The only reason I can think that they're willing to sort of put this aside or forget about it for a moment is because they're winning and they're dominating the sport. If this was a team that wasn't doing well, or let's just say it wasn't, I don't even know where you want to put it, but if it wasn't as dominant as it was, and we would probably be having a different discussion. I mean, we're talking about Alpine going through a restructure. I could see in a different life Red Bull being looking totally different with none of these players being at the helm anymore. I mean, the ones that we're sort of talking about
Yeah, it could
mostly, right?
yeah. I mean,
Could be. So
if this all falls down, because to me it looks very much like it's like what one of these guys is going to go, right? Like either Christian
yeah,
Horner's going to go or Max Verstappen's going to go.
yeah.
I just can't see both of them. With all of the acrimony that's come up, I can't see both of them staying. There is one little point I just want to make before we finish. A lot of our commenters talked about the fact that that you know that it's all about the racing. We want to get back to the racing, and that's the most important thing. I just want to point out that when the racing on, because you talked about gatekeeping last time, and I thought that was a very apt monologue to have. That it's not unfair to say that the regular punter that comes to watch a Formula One race should expect to see a bit more excitement than what we're seeing right now. And you were bitten quite hard for that, I thought, in the comments. Although there were some people that backed you, and I understand why. Because right now, if you look at our views, and we've only been running this channel now for what, 2 months?
Mm-hmm.
And in that 2 months, we've started to see more views in our videos. But it was really interesting to see that our race review did 4 times fewer views than our Christian Horner video.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Or
how
for
little
that matter, band wings too. But yeah, sure.
that is how little
Yeah,
interest
yeah,
there is on track
yeah,
right now
yeah.
versus the intrigue that's happening at Red Bull.
So we talk about what Formula One can do, right? And while I get the fact that this has been a private matter, and we keep hearing these things, and I think these are just complete scapegoat sort of things to talk about and just say, well, that's a Red Bull issue. It really isn't, right? Because this is Red Bull is not just some team. It is one of, oh, by the way, just 10 teams in the world, one of the top three teams, right? If you think about who these top three teams are that you ask most people, they would probably be in the top three for sure, right? And Christian Horner at the center of this is a guy who's leading the team. Now, I don't have it against him. I don't have it for him. I really don't care, to be honest. I'm a Ferrari fan. All I care about is for Ferrari to win. Like, so let me just get that positionality in the way, out of the way. But the reality is that you have at the helm of the team a guy who has been accused of all of this, and he didn't even get so much as an absence from the race. Whereas the person who did complain And maybe she is at equal fault for this. Maybe she is at more fault for this. I don't know. That person is
Because
suspended.
we don't
Just
know.
think about the optics of that for a second. Just think about the message you're sending to people. Oh, by the way, we just celebrated International Women's Day a couple of days ago. Happy International Women's Day, belated one to all of our women viewers and those of you that have outstanding women in your lives. But the reality is, look at the message you're sending. Christian Horner, I mean, I guess he's as culpable as the other party, right? At minimum, right? So you have suspended that young lady or lady, I don't know if she's young or not, but at the same time, I mean,
They're all young
Christian Horner
compared to
gets
us,
to,
Ammar.
they're all young compared to us. That's fair. But think about the message that is sending. So I think that is a very valid point to bring. And it's fair to say that this is a private matter, but this does impact the whole sport, right?
Yeah,
This
it
has an
absolutely
impact on that.
does.
And I think that the message that Formula One is sending, particularly at a time when the racing is not exciting, right? Well, we've had two races and I don't think you can call them exciting. Yes, there are exciting elements of it, but when you don't have that, this story will not just go away because, and I get why Christian Horner wants to get over it. There are people in his family that are impacted. This is not a pleasant thing for him to do. But the reality is that the sport is, and I think Lewis Hamilton said this too, right? It's at a bit of an inflection point in terms of how it deals with this. And the
Pivotal
silence
moment.
is quite disappointing. The silence is quite disappointing. You're right. Maybe Red Bull is not supposed to release information about a private investigation, but I can also envision a world, and that's not a hypothetical world, right? But a real one in which Formula One can say, well, we're going to investigate this because it is about the integrity of the sport,
Of our
which, by the
sport.
way, Mohammed bin
Agreed.
Sulayem has actually said that it's hurting the sport. So why not do your own investigation? And then, oh, by the way, you can bring in that transparency. There's no reason why that cannot be done. So I know there are a lot of excuses, but it is what it's quite disheartening to see how this has been managed, even
I
if the complainant was at fault, even
yeah,
if she was. Yeah.
I completely agree. And on that slightly downbeat bombshell,
Sorry
I
about
think we
that.
should I think we should end. But we're still putting out a lot of content. We've got 3 videos coming out this week after the race. Please like and subscribe. It just gives us a little bit of a kick up the butt to do some more work. And we'll keep bringing you guys some stuff like